Dr. Simon Harris was unremarkable. Average height, average build, average life. He lived in a modest, semi-detached house on a quiet street lined with sycamore trees. His neighbours knew him as a quiet, polite man, always willing to lend a hand. He was a pillar of the community, a beacon of respectability. Dr. Harris worked at the local hospital, St. Bartholomew's, a sprawling red brick building that had stood for over a century. He was a general practitioner, seeing patients with everyday ailments, coughs, colds, the occasional sprained ankle. He was well liked by his patients, who appreciated his calm demeanour and gentle touch. His life was a study in routine. He woke at precisely 7 a.m, ate a simple breakfast of toast and tea, and left for the hospital at 7:45 a.m. sharp. He returned home at 6 p.m, ate dinner, read the newspaper, and retired to bed by 10 p.m. Day after day, his life followed this predictable pattern. But beneath the veneer of normalcy, a darkness lurked, a secret so profound, so terrifying, it threatened to shatter the facade of the ordinary Dr. Harris. The whispers began subtly, like the rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze. Nurses noticed Dr. Harris leaving the hospital late at night, long after his shift had ended. His car, a nondescript grey saloon, would disappear into the night, its tail lights fading into the darkness. At first it was dismissed as dedication to his patients, a sign of his commitment to their well-being. But as the weeks turned into months, the whispers grew louder, laced with a hint of suspicion. Why would a general practitioner need to be at the hospital at such ungodly hours? The night staff, accustomed to the hushed stillness of the hospital after dark, began to feel uneasy. There was a palpable shift in the atmosphere when Dr. Harris was present, a sense of foreboding that sent shivers down their spines. One particularly observant nurse, a young woman named Sarah, noticed something peculiar. Dr. Harris always carried a small, leather-bound doctor's bag on these late-night visits. It was odd, she thought, for a doctor to carry such a bag when making rounds. The disappearance of Mrs. Evelyn Crane sent shockwaves through the hospital. A kindly old woman, she was admitted for a routine hip replacement, a common procedure with a high success rate. Yet one morning her bed was found empty, the sheets cold. The hospital staff searched frantically, their faces etched with worry and confusion. Mrs. Crane, frail and recovering from surgery, couldn't have gone far. Security cameras showed nothing out of the ordinary. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. The police were called and an investigation was launched. Detectives interviewed staff, scoured the hospital grounds and reviewed security footage, but to no avail. Mrs. Crane's disappearance remained an unsolvable mystery. Days turned into weeks, and the trail ran cold. The hospital staff, once abuzz with speculation, fell silent, a pall of unease settling over them. The disappearance of Mrs. Crane became a chilling reminder of the fragility of life, the lurking shadows that could snatch away even the most innocent. Nurse Sarah, haunted by the disappearance of Mrs. Crane, couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The late-night visits, the leather bag, the missing patient, the pieces of the puzzle swirled in her mind, refusing to settle. Driven by a need for answers, Sarah began her own investigation. She started by reviewing Mrs. Crane's medical records, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. As she scrolled through the digital files, her eyes widened in horror. Mrs. Crane's chart showed that she had been prescribed a series of powerful sedatives in the days leading up to her disappearance. The dosage was unusually high, far exceeding the recommended amount for a woman her age and condition. And the doctor who had authorized those prescriptions, none other than Dr. Simon Harris. Section 5. The Doctor's Secret. Armed with this chilling discovery, Sarah knew she had to proceed with caution. Confronting Dr. Harris directly was too risky. She needed concrete evidence, something to expose his dark secret. One evening, as Dr. Harris was leaving the hospital, Sarah followed him at a safe distance. Her heart raced as she trailed his car through the darkened streets, her mind racing with possibilities. She watched as he pulled into a derelict industrial estate on the outskirts of town. The buildings were dark and deserted, their windows boarded up like the eyes of a sleeping giant. A shiver ran down her spine as she realized the secluded location was the perfect place to hide a terrible secret. Sarah parked her car a safe distance away and watched as Dr. Harris entered one of the buildings, a small, nondescript warehouse. She waited, her breath catching in her throat as the minutes ticked by. Section 6. The Face in the Window. As darkness enveloped the industrial estate, Sarah's anxiety grew. She had been waiting for hours, and still there was no sign of Dr. Harris. Doubts began to creep into her mind. Had she been wrong about him? Just as she was about to give up and go home, she saw a flicker of movement in one of the warehouse windows. Her heart skipped a beat as she strained to see through the grime-covered glass. And then she saw him. Dr. Harris, his back to the window, was standing over an operating table. But it wasn't a sterile, brightly lit operating room. The room was dark and dingy, illuminated only by a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. And on the table lay a figure strapped down and unconscious. Section 7. A desperate plea. Terror gripped Sarah's heart as she realized the gravity of the situation. Dr. Harris was not who he seemed. He was a monster hiding in plain sight. She had to get help, had to expose him for the evil he was. She fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking uncontrollably. But as she dialed emergency services, she heard a noise behind her. A twig snapping, a muffled curse. Someone was watching her. Before she could react, a hand clamped down over her mouth, stifling her scream. She struggled, kicking and scratching, but it was no use. Her attacker was too strong. She caught a glimpse of his face in the dim moonlight, a grotesque mask of rage and malice, and then everything went black. Section 8. Unmasking the Monster. Sarah awoke to find herself tied to a chair, her head throbbing, her vision blurry. She blinked, trying to focus, and that's when she saw him. Dr. Harris stood before her, a chillingly calm expression on his face. But his eyes, usually so kind and gentle, now burned with a cold, calculating light. "You shouldn't have followed me, Sarah," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Now you've seen too much." He explained that he wasn't harming his victims, not in the traditional sense. He was keeping them alive, experimenting on them, pushing the boundaries of life and death. He believed he was on the verge of a medical breakthrough, a way to cheat death itself. Sarah listened in horror as he detailed his twisted logic, his belief that the ends justified the means. He was delusional, a madman convinced of his own genius. Section 9. The Price of Silence. "I can't let you get away with this," Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse but resolute. Dr. Harris chuckled, a humorless sound that echoed through the warehouse. "You see, Sarah, that's where you're wrong. You have no choice." He produced a syringe filled with a clear liquid. "This will ensure your silence. You'll forget everything you've seen here tonight. You'll go back to your life and I'll continue my work." Sarah closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. She knew there was no escaping her fate. Dr. Harris would silence her, just like he had silenced so many others. But as he approached her, syringe in hand, a loud crash echoed through the warehouse. The door burst open, bathing the room in blinding light. The police, alerted by Sarah's earlier call, had arrived. Dr. Simon Harris, the unassuming doctor, the pillar of the community, was finally unmasked as the monster he truly was. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling tales.